Alright, this is part 2 of a video series I'm making called Satan Invented Evolution. Now, this, if you haven't watched my first video, you can go back and check it out, and then come back to part 2 right here. Some people have been saying I'm stealing my arguments from Kent Hovind. Well, if you watch Kent Hovind's videos, which I'm going to link to you on the side, he always says he doesn't copyright his material, and if you watch his school classes, which he has online as well, he encourages people to use his arguments, so I'm just doing what he encourages me to do. Let's continue.
Within our solar system, the habitable zone is relatively narrow, beginning well outside the orbit of Venus and ending short of the orbit of Mars. If the Earth were just 5% closer to the Sun, it would be subject to the same fate as Venus, a runaway greenhouse effect with temperatures rising to nearly 900 degrees Fahrenheit.
Because there is a small zone around every star called the habitable zone, where liquid water is possible. Our Earth happens to be in a perfectly spherical orbit around our star. However, if the Earth was a mere 5% closer to our Sun, we would cook like Venus. Temperatures would rise in a runaway greenhouse effect to over 900 degrees, making liquid water impossible, also thereby rendering life impossible.
Conversely, if the Earth were 20% farther from its home star, carbon dioxide clouds would form in its upper atmosphere, initiating the cycle of ice and cold that has sterilized Mars.
Now, if our Earth was a few percent away from our Sun, we would be frozen like Mars, also making life impossible.
We orbit what is known as a spectral type G2 dwarf main sequence star.
We orbit what is called a spectral type G2 dwarf main sequence star.
If the Sun were less massive, like 90% of the stars in the galaxy, the habitable zone would be smaller. To remain within its boundaries, the Earth would have to be positioned closer to its star. Here, increased gravity would lock our planet's rotation into synchronization with its orbit.
If our Sun was smaller, like 90% of the stars in our galaxy, the habitable zone would be smaller, so the Earth would have to be closer to the Sun. However, this would increase gravity, so Earth's orbit around the Sun would sink.
While one side of the Earth continually faced the Sun and increased radiation from solar flares, the dark side of the planet would lay shrouded in perpetual cold and ice. It is unlikely complex life could tolerate these drastic extremes in temperature,
thereby cooking one side of the Earth and freezing the other, making life impossible.
The gravitational pull exerted by our moon, for example, is strong enough to regulate the Earth's climate by stabilizing its tilt and helping to circulate the warm and cold waters of its oceans, while our planet's distance from the Sun permits both liquid water and an oxygen-rich atmosphere.
Our moon exerts a gravitational pull that regulates Earth's climate by stabilizing its tilt, thereby circulating the warm and cold water of its oceans, without which we'd all be dead.
If a recipe for a planet capable of supporting complex life really did exist, then what ingredients, beyond liquid water, might be required? The list of necessary factors continues to grow.
As we learn more about our planet and this universe, we can begin to compile a list of essentials for life and a habitable planet. As we begin to compile this list, we can realize that the chances of these things happening by chance become increasingly small.
All these factors have to be met at one place and time in the galaxy.
All these factors have to be met at one place at one time in the galaxy.
In an attempt to estimate the probability of attaining this combination of factors simultaneously, some researchers have developed equations assigning a conservative 1 in 10 value to each factor deemed necessary for advanced life.
if every element has to be there at the same time. You have to multiply the probability.
In an attempt to estimate the probability of attaining this combination of factors simultaneously, some researchers have developed equations assigning a conservative 1 in 10 value to each factor deemed necessary and essential for life. Every element had to be there at the right time in the right amount in the right way. When you multiply the probabilities, you come to a very shocking number.
And these things rapidly multiply to exceedingly small numbers. The numbers on the order of 10 to minus 15, which is 1/1000th of 1 trillion. And it's a number like that you have to compare to the 100 billion stars that are in the galaxy.
It's a number like that you need to compare to the billions of stars out there.
On their face value, these probabilities are speaking. What they're telling us is this can't happen, or this is very unlikely to happen in the galaxy.
At face value, these probabilities are speaking. The Earth did not happen by chance. Some people look up at the stars and say, wow, there's so many billions of stars, we must be here by chance. And I look up and say, wow, God's really powerful. It's all belief. God will always give you the chance to disobey and disbelieve. Remember the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the garden? This is the end of part 2. Check